I've seen bits about this on Twitter over the last few days, but am I right in saying that it's not really made much of the mainstream news headlines?
I think it has in Canada. I mean, there's obviously been a lot of coverage there, but over here, there's not been much. There's quite a bit of coverage emerging today, but it's yet another concern I've got about this whole crisis. There's been freedom marches right across Europe for months and months and months now, and not receiving that much coverage in the UK media. It's the same thing with the truckers. So who knows whether there's 50,000 trucks on the way to Ottawa right now. But some of the images that have emerged from this, some of the stories that have emerged, this is a huge scale protest, a peaceful protest. It's not just about mandates, it's about a stand against authoritarianism and the general restrictions throughout this crisis. And some of the views and the optics from this are extraordinary. It's like something out of a Burt Reynolds movie when you see them driving through the snow, through the night. But this is a story that's gathering momentum, so much so that Australia truckers are now saying they're going to do the same thing. And also European truckers are coming together saying they're going to truck in a convoy to Brussels. So I think this is a story in terms of awareness and coverage in the UK. It's something that's beginning, but I think it will roll out more and more and more over the next few weeks because there seems to be a momentum to this.
What is it specifically that they are objecting to?
I think it's on a number of different levels. I think it's the same way that the marches, for instance, the march in London last week, I think it's about concerns about loss of freedom, about ongoing restrictions, about vaccine mandates, and also vaccine passports. So it's a bundling together of what they see as big government stripping away people's rights and the right to choose, the right to demonstrate, the right to have medical choice. And also take a stand against governments saying you'll be discriminated and ostracized if you don't conform with our measures. So I think it's a number of different points that are all bundled around some of the mandates and restrictions through this crisis.
And I'm just looking through now. I've done a bit more research on some of the individual stories. And what I find quite interesting and heartening is that a lot of these people, actually like myself, have been vaccinated themselves, but are still angry that other people's choices are being taken away from them by them being restricted in being able to do their job, crossing the border or whatever else.
Yeah, that's where I stand on this. It's exactly that. It should be about freedom of choice. You know, we've all adhered to many, many restrictions. Many of those restrictions I fundamentally disagree with. It should be about choice. We're at a point in the UK now where, thankfully, it is about choice. You know, the vaccine passports have fizzled away. Masks are now optional. That's where it should be. My view is that now the response to COVID should be a bit like the previous responses we've always had with flu. If people are not feeling well, they self-isolate. If people do want to wear a mask, they can wear a mask. If people want to take a jab, that's fine. If people don't want to take a jab, that's fine as well. We shouldn't be ostracizing individuals for restrictions choice and also medical choice. And I think that's at the heart of the problem in many, many countries. And the government are taking away that freedom of choice. And I think fundamentally that's why people are protesting against it.
I really agree with you on that, especially now the Omicron is clearly the dominant variant. If Omicron wasn't the dominant variant and there was still a variant that perhaps the most vulnerable, or the more vulnerable, I should say, would be harmed by, you could get your head around why governments panic. I don't particularly agree now because I think we've had long enough to put preparations in place, but you could get your head around why, the logic there is. But with Omicron being the dominant variant, it does seem staggering, and that there seems to be this panic around. And what do you think it is? Because what's interesting is obviously this is taking place in the backdrop of Omicron, but also Justin Trudeau himself has said, well, this is just quite a fringe thing that's going on. There was a really interesting quote from him about it, where he essentially said that this was just not really a massive protest that was taking place. He characterised the protesters as a small fringe minority who are on their way to Ottawa, who are holding unacceptable views. I mean, is that because he's scared that it might mean that people just won't take the vaccine? Is it because he's scared that people won't obey his rules? Why is he saying this?
Well, I think it's all those factors. It's undermining what the basic premise of these protests are about. I mean, I've seen some of the coverage before about some of the freedom marches in London, which have been sort of tarnished as sort of anti-vax marches. They're not. These marches are largely about people expressing their right to freedom, worried about government, big state authoritarianism, and also some of the restrictions, some of the daft restrictions, and also just from a human point of view, people are marching and protesting because they're worried about their livelihoods. Many businesses have been forced to close for months on end throughout this crisis. The truckers are a perfect example, whereby without truckers, a country does not function properly. And their voice should be heard as well. And I suspect the majority of those truckers who are taking part in their convoy are doing it for exactly the reasons that we've talked about there. And I think Trudeau might be worried about this because when you start having populist movements that people can relate to, when their message is fundamentally about the expression and the rights and freedom, then governments start to take notice. And if you have potentially up to 50,000 truckers arriving in Ottawa, that's a major problem for the Canadian government.
And let's just get our head around that number again. It's actually 50,000 trucks, right? I mean, it is the most staggering number of HGV vehicles that are in these convoys, right? So I don't know how it can be a fringe minority.
Yeah, I mean, he's trying to marginalise this, and he's using various phrases to say that this is just literally a bunch of individuals who are extremists. I mean, that's the classic statement of any government that's worried about any particular protest. Most of the protests from start to finish throughout this crisis are around people worrying about their livelihoods, worrying about not getting medical treatment for non-COVID, worrying about mental health issues, kids' welfare, the loss of freedom. It's a bundling of concerns together that come under what I've said before called collateral damages. And people are worried about whether government will give all those freedoms back again. Because quite often when governments take away freedoms, they don't always come back. Some of them remain with the government. If you look what's happening in Scotland at the moment, whereby there's moves by the Scottish government to keep aspects of their emergency powers indefinitely. That means it's almost like the carrot and stick approach of government to say, look, you can have your freedoms right now, but at any time we can take them away from you.
I completely agree that this is where I found the narrative around Boris Johnson and Freedom Day quite frustrating, because firstly, I am grateful to those 100 or so Conservative MPs more than they'll ever know for standing up to Boris Johnson. But secondly, we've got our freedoms back to a point because it was good for Boris Johnson, not because it was good for us. He wasn't doing it because he was presenting us with this massive favour. And I find this narrative that, we should be so grateful now that we might not have to wear masks so often. This is stuff that we should be grateful for. This is stuff that we're entitled to.
Completely. I mean, the Coronavirus Act still applies. I mean, it's up for renewal in, I think it's March. But the government, we own the government. The government do not own us. We need to remember that. We elect them, we pay their salaries. And for governments around the world to basically take away a lot of our freedoms and put draconian measures in place for months on end, and then say, okay, you've all behaved now, and actually we think that basically you can crumbs from the table, here's some more freedoms back, but at any point we'll raise the threat of taking them away, is not effective and ethical government. And I agree. I think in the case of what Johnson's done, it's done for political expediency, nothing else, because he knows his polls are sliding and also he's under pressure from his backbenchers.
But then what would you say to those people who are saying, well, look, these people have the right to protest, but they are massively irresponsible. They are fueling people having anti-vax views. They are fueling people not taking the vaccine when, for society as a whole, many people say that that's going to be a better thing. What would you say to that criticism?
Well, I can see what people might have some concerns about that, but I think it's framing of the message, exactly what Trudeau's doing on this, and some of the media have been doing with some of the freedom marches in London before. The vast majority of people who are concerned about restrictions are hardworking, decent people who just want their freedoms back. They want the opportunity to trade on their businesses properly. They want their kids to have the freedoms that they enjoyed when they were children, and ideally a few more. And what people are concerned about is that a lot of those freedoms, it's like the government are renting those freedoms to us. We should be owning those freedoms, not the government acting as a landlord and occasionally saying, okay, you've done well for a while. We'll lob some freedoms at you. Just behave over the summer and we'll see where we're at next winter. We've got to get beyond government threats of taking away freedoms and get to a point whereby we get back to the old normal. We see COVID and the restrictions of COVID as no more than, say, the cycles per year of flu, where people, if they want to take jabs, can take jabs. People are allowed to trade with their businesses openly and effectively, and the schools are free and open and not wearing masks.
I agree. It's not the role of the state. I was on a television show. I know we've got a break, but I was on a television show this week with Dr. Shola, who said, "Oh, I'm happy. I would be happy to show a passport to get into the pub." I find that absolutely staggering. We're going to keep an eye on this story. We may try and talk to you again tomorrow, if that's all right, James. We're also going to try and cross live to Canada as well tomorrow morning and try and speak to a trucker that's involved in this. But for now, James Melville, political commentator, really grateful for you.